Welcome to A Lunch with Biggie, a podcast about small business and creatives sharing their stories and inspiring you. My guest today is a personal chef turned professional speaker who's on a mission to help others find their purpose, discover their passion, and develop their potential. Please welcome Kevin Green Elevates. What's going on, Kevin?
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Doing well. Thank you so much for coming on and having a lunch break with me.
Yes, sir.
I always like to ask the first question, which is like, what's your go-to lunch or sandwich?
Bacon cheeseburger, mayo chup.
Okay. I like that. I like that. Any fries or any sides to go with it or what?
Well, that's an ideal lunch. Not if I'm concerned
Yeah.
about, health or whatever. I love a bacon cheeseburger, mayo chup, no salad needed, brioche bun. French fries, I enjoy a French fry. You gotta have a cherry Coke.
Okay, cherry Coke. Okay. I like that. I like that. Okay, very cool. So tell me a little bit about like give me like the lunch version of it, cuz obviously like you and I kind of talked before like that you're kind of transitioning, because I'm very intrigued by the idea of the how you went from a chef to now becoming a professional speaker. So I kind of want to know a little bit, like give me that origin story of what how that kind of happened.
Yes, so if you go back to when I was in college, I majored in dietetics and nutrition as an athlete, a D1 runner, and thought I wanted to be a chef. All the jobs I had had were in food, and I knew I enjoyed the sport and the creativity of the kitchen. What I ran into was the thing called the night shift, and no one had ever taught me about that. And I'm like, I hate working at night. And so that traditional fine dining chef route, like it didn't fit, and it took a while, but I had to figure out how to do food in a way that fit me. And so it went through some iterations. The personal chef model that I started from zero proved to be that fit. And then in 2023, I went through some personal adversities, and it kind of gave clarity. And for me to continue to scale and grow, I was like, you know what? I want to package these life experiences, help other people go further faster, and move into the speaking space.
Nice. Okay. It's very concise. I very perfectly nice in a bow. When you were doing, out of curiosity, when you were doing like the personal chef, was that something that you were able to kind of then figure out when you were doing that, just figure out like, hey, I could harness it based on my schedule because I could prep things or do things, and then therefore I'm not always doing the night shift type thing, and you're able to kind of like pre prep foods and things like that for people? Was that kind of the idea when you kind of transitioned from, being a chef to a personal chef?
Yeah, something like that. There were a few organizations in the country that help people start it up, the USPCA, the American Personal Private Chef Association. So I used some of their resources, but I used an in-home model where I would come to you with a bunch of gear, do a four-course dinner party, do an in-home event, do a meal prep service. But the thing was, it was like a 9 to 5. And so it gave me a core value of mine is that autonomy, that control, and I wasn't playing when it and not having fun when other people were. And for me, that meant more than that traditional fine dining chef role. And so that model really fit. Yes.
No, that makes sense. And then, so since 2023, have you been like full time doing professional speaking, doing Kevin Green Elevates? Has that been your full time thing since 2020?
So we're still cooking some, but we're in that speaker space, and we're reaching out to young professionals. I like to say I'm helping them create a life they love by finding that career that fits.
Okay, I like that. One of the things that I've enjoyed from like looking at your watching your videos and stuff like that, I love your use, especially since you're a chef. So I'm all about the idea of like keeping the branches of like kind of staying within the realm. Hence, my podcast is called Lunch with Biggie. I own a sandwich themed brand. So I kind of love the fact that you kind of still use that, even though you're kind of, steering away from the chef. But I love the use of an onion as an example. And it's funny because when you would talk about it, the first thing I kept thinking about, which is not a bad thing, is Shrek, because obviously Shrek talks about how the onion has various layers, especially as you peel back the layers. So I kind of wanted you to talk a little bit about that, how like you describe some of the things that you do based on kind of like almost like an onion, and cutting an onion. So I kind of wanted to get a little bit more information from you on that.
Yeah, so a few thoughts there. That onion idea, it came from there's another speaker in the space who uses a coffee bean as a metaphor, and he's does it very well. And as I was developing my brand, I was like, I need something. And I was at a coaching clinic one day, and I was like, this is it. Because what happens with the onion is, you've got the papery outer layers, and then you peel that back, and you've got all the layers. You can see the striations in the onion, and then you get to that core. And I was like, this is the perfect metaphor from a chef perspective to teach people how to metaphorically like look at their life and get to the core of what matters. And so I use that onion to teach one of my frameworks. I call it a 3P framework, the onion opportunity. And it's where each textbook knife cut to properly dice an onion stands for purpose, passion, and potential. So it's an amazing way to filter, find that career that fits through that onion metaphor.
Yeah, man, that it does hit, and I think it kind of it's a good illustration of it because, you're right. It does have quite a bit of different layers, and it's always and obviously sometimes you can get teary eyed if you don't cut it right and you're not doing the right thing when you're doing it. I wanted to talk a little bit about and obviously like I'm intrigued because I know like obviously how you're kind of transitioning and all of that, and I kind of love the idea that you've kind of done you've been in a quite a bit of within the culinary space. I mean, obviously you got some culinary chops because you've been on Chopped. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about like your time before or after, like when you decided to kind of go into the space of that of motivation of like speaking and stuff like that. Was this before, like right before or after you did Chopped? And I guess and at the same time I'm kind of curious, like what did you learn from being on it at the same time?
No, great question. So I went on Chop prior to launching my speaking business. I was actually, so it's a fun fact. We're talking to entrepreneurs here and folks that are wanting to do big things. And so, I've made several career pivots. And so I started the chef business, left it and started a culinary program, taught high school for 5 years, and then relaunched the business and then transitioned yet again. The Chopped experience, though, was so cool. It was one of those things I joked if I was ever going to do food TV, that's the one I would pick. And, it was defining for me. And I joke if you're going to go on national TV to like learn something about yourself, well, this is the way to do it. But I will say a few thoughts there. Like they didn't give me like, here's how to be cool on TV, 10 steps to or anything. They like throw you to the fire. And it's very like outside of TV edits, like what you see skill wise is what you get. But I want to note, like, it has become part of one of my keynote talk points because it helped define my food style and really taught me the power of intuition.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Like what and I guess I'm also kind of curious, like what was in your basket? Like what was it
Yes.
like? Because that's kind of, and I will say, like out of all the shows, that is one of the best. Like Iron Chef is a good one as well, but Chopped is like the great thing about that is the fact that it is like life's unknowns. You don't know what to do. How do you react? How do you pivot? How do you adapt? Which are all things that are super important when it comes to like in life because there there is no roadmap of like perfect, it's not like a map that you've like printed out and says, oh, well, I'm going to go, I start here and I end there. It doesn't work that way. So how did, like, what was, out of curiosity, what was your in a hidden basket? And then, and, what was in there that, and what did you have to do or kind of, where was like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah, so uncertainty on that note is a tenet of my story. When I quit corporate to start the chef business, like I had to face that. And so I had to face it again on Shop. And so I had, well, it's season 53, episode 11, Gluten for Punishment. So um I had scallops and bacon. I had ostrich flap, which is like the wing. And so I'd never cooked with ostrich before. So I was like, what am I gonna do? So, spoiler alert, I had two goals: don't get cut and make it to the second round. And made it to that second round. But my first dish was super strong and reflective of me. But in the second round, I got in my head. It wasn't my best dish. I made something that didn't reflect me, and I wouldn't even eat it myself. And it showed on the plate. And so it taught me like play to your strengths, but if it didn't feel good, like almost like a little feeling. If it wasn't a knowing, if it didn't come from that strong place, like don't do it. And so I tell myself now, like, feel it and fit it. Make sure if you make a decision, like make sure it comes from this strong place and fit it in such a way that it fits within your scope of what you can currently do so that you can always win. Play to your strengths.
So I'm curious about that because so what a lot of times like you said, like if you're not feeling it and if it's not what it is, there's a huge obstacle, and you probably see this, and I'm always kind of intrigued by it because what happens is, and I sometimes go, I kind of tell myself a lot of times, progress over perfection,
Mm,
because a lot of times what happens is, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, it's not perfect, so therefore I'm not ready for it to go out into the world and to start. And then what happens? You hinder yourself, and then now you're not like you're passionate about it, but you're not actually progressing because you're kind of hindering, you putting like a your own hurdles on yourself. How do you get overcome that? Because that's like a big one, right? Is like the hurdle of like the like we I don't know why we self-sabotage ourselves very well. So I'm kind of curious on like what do you think are some ways that you were able to and been able to beat those hurdles and go over those hurdles and be able to kind of keep that progress even though it may not be perfect.
Yeah, so I have three things that I call like career kryptonites: perfection, the need for certainty, and control. And PCC, perfection, certainty, and control. And I named the speaking business Kevin Green Elevates. It came from a dinner party where I was unpacking everyday ingredients, and the client was like, "Those aren't. Where's the foie gras?" I was like, "Well, it's not on the menu." But the point was. These are everyday ingredients that you're adding flavor to. You're creating, building flavors, adding spices, and making something magnificent. And it was like, what's this idea of elevating every day? And so in food, it's adding spices, building flavors. But in life, it's like, I've trained for High Rocks, which is a competitive fitness race. And like, there are days I went out to the gym or I went for a run a minute ago and it's blazing hot. But like, it was that 1% better everyday mentality. Like, I didn't want to do it, but I know it's far worse to not do it. So I got it done. And it's like, if we can elevate daily, move the needle 1%, we'll get closer and closer to that goal. And done is better than perfect.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that, man. Very, very true. And you talked a little bit about the three P's: purpose, passion, and potential. I wanted to kind of get an idea of like where that kind of came about, and then maybe give if there's like some tips or tricks that you give people to kind of figure out, because I know sometimes, and I don't know if you come across a lot of people that have that where they're like, I know I'm good at something, but I don't know what I'm good at. You know what I mean? Like there it's like a weird like or I don't know. And I guess I'm just kind of curious, like when you see that, when you come across people that have those things like a purpose, a passion, and then like but they're not sure where it is, like it's unguided, like how do you get them to focus and figure out like, okay, this is the direction I should be going in? Because we tend to sometimes not go that route even though we may have a natural skill, and we just kind of, I don't know, we kind of lessen it per se.
Yeah, so I think those are like big picture questions that we all kind of wrestle with from time to time and at different ages and stages. The three P's for me originated when I very first started the chef business. I had a feature in the local newspaper, and she like titled the interview "The ABCs of something something," and those three words like came from that, and they stayed with me for years. And I was like, I want to use that. Those are pillars of what I do: purpose, passion, and potential. And so for me, they've served as filters. In fact, I feel so strongly about it that if you were to like filter almost 20 years of my career, the degrees, the student loan debt, all the things, and you could answer those three questions on the front end of things, you'll go further faster. And so I think everything starts with identity. And so when I talk to groups, young professionals, college students, I like to start with identity and figuring out like your roles, your personality, your essence. And I think like Myers-Briggs, Enneagram, Clifton Strengths, all those sort of tools are starting points to discover your identity, because it's like you know who you are, then you figure out what to do. One begets the other.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I've done Clifton Strength. I actually had I have a friend of mine who's a Clifton Strength coach, and
Yes,
it's and I think it's an amazing thing to see. I think sometimes we don't, and it's a great starting point. I think if you can kind of see what you're good at, why not harness those things and also be able to see things that you maybe are not as good at, that you can kind of learn and be able to kind of improve on, or at least know, hey, this may be something that I'm not as strong at, that maybe I need to partner with someone who is, and I can kind of go from there and be able to work together when it comes to those things.
for sure. There's this. I'll note too. There's this exercise I've done with groups before, and you may be familiar with it. It's called the 7 I exercise.
Okay.
And so let's say I said, "Hey, what's your college major, for example, or who do you want to be when you grow up?" And so they answer that question. Well, off the cuff, okay, surface answer. And then I'll say, "Okay, so well, why do you want to do that?" And they pause, they think about it, and they give an answer. a little more in depth, peeling back the layers of that onion, get to the core, and we work our way down. I had a coach do this with me for this neuroscience program, and it was a day of epiphany. And so sometimes it just pause for the cause, peel back a layer, and think a little bit deeper. And clarity, I mean, let me tell you, clarity breeds confidence. It really does.
I love that. I love the seven idea of seven whys. I'm trying to figure out how I would how I can do that to myself, because I'm like I'm one of those. I'm one of those where I try to figure out what it is, my ultimate why on why I do certain things. So I just know I just keep saying yes, and I keep trying to go in the directions, but that's one of the things that I'm always kind of curious on. What? So obviously, this is one thing I've always been kind of intrigued on, because obviously, like, it's almost very similar to how I would say I would almost kind of label it almost like a therapist in a way, where like there's ingredients that to make a successful meal or a successful life, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, like there's certain aspects of it where obviously, like, and that's kind of the beauty of it, is that we're all a work in progress. So it's kind of one of those where like I look at it sometimes where we're looking at it in the sense of like you have answers to be able to help others, but at the same time you're also trying to also at the same time you're also going through your own levels of whys, because I'm assuming the whys of the chapters of your life as you go, those whys and those questions change and they evolve, and then you're trying to elevate to the next level from where you're currently at right now, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's kind of the big one, especially you in the starting off as a business, and doing this as a business. I'm always kind of intrigued, like, so when you go, a lot of it do you do, I know you say you talk to a lot of young groups and like on young entrepreneurs and things like that. Do a lot of times, is it something that you do face to face in person, do it online, and then at the same time also, like, how do you like find that community that needs you, and then you're able to then provide those resources to?
Yeah, so I work a lot with young professionals, colleges, upcoming graduates, first year programs, and things of that nature. And I like to offer like some coaching calls after the fact when I present. I like to do workshops with my educational background. I enjoy not just being in front of a group, but sharing what I know. And then there are three things that if you go to Kevin Green Elevate, you'll see I like to educate, entertain, but ultimately equip. It's like hearing a great speech, but not knowing what to do the next day. So you got to give some practical tools. And I'm a big believer in that. I'll note too, it's like you said something there in the question about like personal development and all those things. I'm a part of a variety of coaching groups and spent invested resources on growing my own self. You're talking about at different points along the way. And like even recently, I've just started to think about like my why. Why do I do the things? And I think there comes a time where we have to flip it a little bit and turn it outwards and think about our who. And so like we often do things better and more assertively if we're motivated by a greater cause. And so I hope that speaks to someone, because I'm starting to think about like how can I serve my audience better? I'll read this book so that it adds value to them.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think it's so important to be able to do that, because also obviously it also involves like who you're talking to and who and what you're able to present to them, which I think is so so important to be able to do, because there's going to be a message in anyone that you talk to or anyone listening to this, that little tidbit that's going to be the one that nugget that's going to lead them to go, oh, take them to the next step, to either a follow you or find out more about it, or to basically go, I like that, I should look into that or do more of that. And I think that's like one of the big ones that I find to be very interesting. You do a really good job on social,
Thank you.
being able to kind of re-emphasize a lot of the different things, kind of reword it or rephrase it or restructure it in a way so that like the message is being conveyed. I'm always kind of intrigued on on tips or advice when it comes to social on that aspect, and like being able to do that, because that's something that I think a lot of people trying to like their message and trying to get it out, they feel, at least from what I've seen, and I'm guilty of it sometimes, I'm like, I don't need to reintroduce myself or redo this, because they already know who I am, they're on my social. But like that's not really the case. So I'm kind of curious, like, do you have any tips or tricks or anything like that that you would recommend for someone when you're trying to, as you're trying to convey your message and what you're trying to accomplish?
For sure. So social media and Kevin, we've had an interesting relationship. Like stiff armed it for so long, but also didn't have to. I had enough organic traffic for my other business. And so I had always said though, like if I show up on social, it's got to be authentic. And after the divorce in 2023, after the business partnership that didn't take off because they were toxic, and I finally realized that, and I set some boundaries and clarified my purpose, like it shifted things. And I said, you know what, I have something to say finally. I'm going to start doing that. And then I'm still growing in social. I'm still learning. It's an area to grow on or grow in. But I've heard it said through one of my coaches that in order to help someone else, you just need to be 10% better. You don't have to be perfect, just be 10%. When I went through some of those hard times, like I was literally binging coaches and counselors and whatever on YouTube. And I was like, if I can take my life and put that into content and help someone else when they're going through it, it's worth it, you know? And so, but I've tried to be very specific in one, being authentic in how I show up on social media. I've also tried to be a student of the game and, be consistent. I think those are three things that are important. And obviously, like, I never wanted to be the guy who said, yeah, here's what I had for lunch. No, like show up with value, speak to the pain of who you're trying to reach and impact, and see it as service. And so that's kind of how I've done it. And I'll note this too for those that are listening. And I think we all need to be courageous, and it takes some gumption to like put ourselves out there, whether we're an employee, whether we're an entrepreneur, or both. Like after time, like people have seen what I've been doing lately and they're like, man, that's bold, or that's real brave, or kudos to you. And so like I stayed quiet for a long time, but here we are, and it's been worth it, and we're only really just getting started with some of that. So that's what I would say.
What do you think has been the hardest part of this journey that you've been on currently right now? Like, and obviously, like, what do you think has been, what are some of the difficult things that you've gone through? And obviously, you mentioned some of the things that kind of led to this path. But I'm just kind of curious, like, business wise, or just trying to get this going and get this started. What are some of the things that you've kind of learned along the way, as you've gone through this so far?
So I think we all, well, for types like me, type A, recovering perfectionist, we like it when everything's in place. We like it when everything's polished, when that signature dish, you've wiped the rim of that plate, you've got the garnishes on there. We don't like the dirty work or the messy middle. And so it's this ebb and flow for me where I've kind of got the machines well oiled on one end, but then when you make a pivot, a transition, and you have to learn new skills, it gets messy again. So you go from like top of the mountain to the valley, but you have to be willing to pay that price so that you can get back to the top again. And I think that's true for anyone trying to do something of significance. And so with that has come, there's a learning curve, whether it's social media, podcasts, content creation, whatever, implementing AI. So there's been this learning curve, and then just patience. I think we all want everything to be done tomorrow or yesterday, but good things take time. It's like a good sauce.
I like that. I almost feel like that is kind of almost when that may become, when you said patience, I thought to myself, I'm like, that's the hidden fourth P.
Yeah.
And it comes to this because like you have like and you being a runner especially, we'll just tie us all in now, is the fact that a lot of times we want to have immediate gratification. We want to have that end goal that's going. And I think that's kind of one of the big ones where I like tell a lot of people, especially like me being a clothing brand. I tell people, I'm like, hey, I'm like, this isn't like a get rich quick thing. This is a marathon. This isn't a sprint. And so sometimes we tend to become impatient because we think it's not working and things like that. And I'm kind of curious on how do you keep yourself how do you keep yourself in check when it comes to, because obviously when you're going through this process and you're finding your purpose and your passion and you're kind of dealing with the different potentials and you're going through that, how, like, do you do anything that either keeps you in check or gives you kind of like, I don't know, a moment to kind of like reflect back onto what you've, like, how far you've accomplished or where you've gone? Is there something in that, like, when in your talks or even in your own personal, that you kind of do that? Because I think sometimes we get kind of lost in that because obviously we're constantly thinking of, we want to improve, we want to get better, we want to do a little bit better every day, we want to get to that, like, that finish line. but then sometimes we just forget to stop and actually like turn around and look at the like how far we've come,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of curious, like, do you have things like that built in that you do yourself, or and if you do, like, what are some methods that you do to kind of reflect on like some of the goals and some of the things, the accomplishments that you've done?
Well, for sure. So I did this neuroscience program like a year ago and learned quite a bit about the brain. And if you've never learned about the brain, it's a fascinating machine. Like it, there's more going on than we give it credit for. And so I learned about hormones and like how dopamine, for example, plays a role. And a lot of times when we're just scrolling or we're looking for a like there's a dopamine spike. But that's a good thing. And all that to say that the brain is wired for a reward, and I think we have to pause for the cause. We have to stop and smell the roses and celebrate our wins. Like it's imperative that we find a way to just look back to your point and celebrate, even if it's a small thing. And so I try to have a morning routine where it's a moment of gratitude, a moment of reflection. I have some brain priming, voice recorded exercises that help me to get perspective out of the gate. In times past, I've even kept like photo journals on my phone of like this happened or had a big, or literally last week I called it Big Win Wednesday. I had 4 or 5 things stack up that just meant something in business. Like, a pitch went through, a podcast came through, I had a meeting, and so like I sent myself an email, as silly as that sounds, and I've kept a highlight reel journal and just put in along the way, and then at the end of the year look back to reflect. Yes, we have to celebrate the wins along the way.
All right, hold on. I need to know about highlight journal, that and the email idea, because I am one of those where I sometimes am very good at preaching the little wins, and I have one where I'm a big fan of doing like a post-it notes and having like a jar and then writing the wins, putting it in the post-it note, like something like that. So that way at the end you have something physical to kind of look at and stuff like that. I say it, but I suck at it. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious, like when you do like your photo journal, like is it one of those that you're taking pictures and you keep them in an album, or like on your phone, or is it something that you're emailing? What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I've done two things, two versions. In years past, I've kept like a handwritten, we'll call it a Google sheet, where it's like a highlight reel. So if I had like a dinner party and it went off well, and maybe I got a nice tip, like here's a win for the day, and it was just like one-liners, clear and concise. And I would go back and look at the year's end and just see this log of all these things. So it would put it in perspective. Currently, I use the Trello app, if you're familiar. So I've got tabs in there, and I've got one titled Inspirational and Tactical Screenshots. So, if I got something of value on a social platform, or if I got like a feedback that really spoke to a thing, like I'll save it. And I try to, we all need like a fire starter from time to time. And so I'll take a few minutes and look at that person on Instagram that I find value in, or I'll go back to that screenshot I took and celebrate that win. Maybe it was someone who was giving me some flowers and I did a good thing or I did a good job. Like let's spark the fire on the regular and keep that momentum, keep that flame burning.
What when you're not working, you're not cooking. Well, I have a cooking question, and then it's kind of like I'm always kind of intrigued by what do you typically, obviously you told me you like a good burger, a bacon cheeseburger and stuff like that, but I'm like, what do you typically like cooking? Like if it's just you're what do you do for fun, and then what do you kind of and what do you cook for yourself for fun, like if you're home and cooking? And it doesn't have to be elaborate, because I mean I want you to be
Yeah.
keep it real. Like you could just tell me it's gonna be grilled chicken, that's fine. But I'm just kind of curious, like what is it that you kind of do for fun, to unwind, do for fun, and at the same time, what are you usually cooking at home?
So, from a culinary perspective, and that's a great question, by the way, I found that people love talking about food much more than like, "Well, here's my speaker business. Let's lean into the chef." So, I love talking about food and bringing people together. The table's a powerful thing. But so my chef business is such a production and a whole different motivation. When it's me at home, it's much more simple, much more streamlined, almost like a Rachel Ray of the past 30-minute meal. And so like that's like taco bowls, like spaghetti and meatballs. I love grilling. I just bought a new grill actually and just been enjoying that over the summer. I think in addition to burgers, like steaks are one of my favorite meals. I grew up, that's a memory I had with my dad. Like we would have steak, baked potato, and A1. Lots of A1 sauce on the side. And so I still enjoy grilling. And so I love that. when I'm not cooking, speaking, working, what have you. So I don't know if I should tell everyone, but I joke that I'm a part-time professional wrestling fan.
That's not a bad thing. I work from home, so I tend to watch now way more wrestling than I ever had before now that it's on Netflix.
Yes.
So I'm not gonna lie, like that's my it's not really a guilty pleasure. It's my pleasure. I enjoy watching it.
You know, all right. Well, I'm glad you're with me. I'm not the only one because that so resonates. And here's what happened. So I realized all the stuff I grew up watching prior to my 25-year hiatus was all on Peacock. You know, the archives, the WCWs. So I went back and watched it, and then I was like, "What's going on with this new stuff?" And so then I kind of got interested, found some YouTubers that were giving reviews, and so now I'm kind of in it. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. Jokes aside, like as a speaker, as a communicator, it's the story, it's the emotion. And like if you look at the production of like a WWE event, if you look at the storytelling that happens, if you look at the skill set it takes, like it makes sense. And so I find, I guess what I'm getting at is I find a measure of inspiration through that. And so it's a way for me to kind of relax and unwind and kind of disconnect for a minute. So that's what I enjoy.
So I will tell you, and there's two things that I would recommend. I'm looking forward to seeing because that's something that I enjoy, the storytelling aspect of it and how they come up with the creative process of it and how they kind of build it. There's two shows that there's a Netflix show that's about to come out that is that basically like how they come up with the storyline and the whole scripting of it. That's supposed to be released sometime this summer. And then the other one that I watch that I just find to be interesting, I mean, it's kind of reality showish. It is reality showish, but still, I enjoy it. It's called LFG, which is like legends and I
Yeah.
guess future greats. And what I love about it is the fact of that is the idea of like creating that relationship and that like storyline of like each match being like its own kind of almost like a, you know, in many ways is almost like a dance or some kind of like theatrical event, which is amazing by it. Yeah, that's one of the things I enjoy about it. That, and I think I'm truly amazed by the physical feats of these people, how they do certain things, even how they like, I know they get hurt, but like how
Yeah.
they're able to do half the things that they do. And you're kind of like trying to figure out like the magic trick of like, well, they didn't even touch them, but it looks like you hit them, you know, and things like that. But
Yes.
so no, I totally get it. And that's actually, it's funny because I have a friend who she's a food person. She does a food writer, and she loves wrestling, and we end up talking half the time about wrestling, about, hey, did you watch the wrestling this week? Did you watch Raw this weekend, or whatever? And we'll just kind of chit chat about it. So no, I think it's actually a very cool idea and a very interesting way of going, because it does kind of hit your P's as well. Like
Yeah.
their purpose of what it is to entertain you. Their passion is to get you out and separate you from, you know, your day to day, and also kind of give you something to, you know, to cheer on, and then all like the potential of like what could happen and what's going to happen, and like the whole idea of like the crowd singing, and like I mean, it's like they have you at the palm of your hands, and then like those guys, those wrestlers all know it, you know,
Yeah.
and that's the beauty of it. It's like a very orchestrated thing with everyone to be in a camaraderie and a whole group thing. So no, I love that. I think that's
Yeah.
awesome. I Very, very cool. Very, very cool. Especially since I literally just watched, like, I think I just watched like a pay-per-view that was on, like, I may not watch it on a Sunday, but it's on Peacock or something. And I'll be like, oh, I'll
Yeah.
just turn it on and watch it. So no, I totally get that. I love that.
Good.
What advice do you have for someone wanting to start something?
Yes. Wow. Well, a few things. I used to tell friends that I use the word called, and I think some people may use that word calling and maybe mean different things. But for conversation, I used to tell them, like, you have to be called to quit. Like, don't do it on a whim. And what I mean by that is, like, I was 28 years old. I had a corporate job. I was an R&D chef with a national dining chain. They were making changes at the top, and stuff got really hard. And so I started to look elsewhere, and I had like this weekend where I was like up late, kind of praying for answers basically, and I was trying to figure some stuff out, and ended up going in on a Monday and turning in my notice. Like I quit without a job, the one thing my dad said to never do. The hard part of that is it led to one of the hardest seasons of my life. I was married at the time, went down to one salary, things got tough. It took 2 years to get the chef business full time where I could support myself. So I had to like work part all the things, and that was incredibly difficult. It's something that I never want to have to go through again. But at the same time, 12 years or so later, I wouldn't be sitting here today talking to you had I never taken that step. And so quitting corporate without a job, jumping out without a parachute, because I was your prototypical student. I did all the things the teacher said to do. Like, you know, I had the resume, I went to the private school, I made the grades, but A and B and C did not equal D. And so what I would say is like, you have to face uncertainty. You have to take a calculated risk. And on some point, you got to open those hands of control, you know, and it's going to be hard. There's going to be things you don't know, but that's where you leverage your strengths and ask other experts. You know, I think a recipe for success with for me has been grit, determination, some faith and grace, and then just again moving that needle, that 1% every day. And I think a life lived well involves a measure of uncertainty.
I'm just kind of curious. What was the whisper that you heard? Like, was it a whisper that you heard that kind of told you, like, hey, like, this is like for make you to kind of be able to go, like, I just can't do this anymore? Like, was it something that happened, or was it like a whisper in the back of your head, in the back of your mind, or your ear hearing it, and they was just telling you, like, this isn't like there's something better or there's something else to do? I'm always intrigued by like what was it that kind of led to that to give you that to make you go and do the like like you got froggy and you jumped like
Yeah.
what was it?
Whew. So I like that question. And you said whisper. So I'll go there if you'll go there with me. Okay.
Yeah, I want no, I'm with you. That's the
Yeah.
reason why, because I'm curious about
Yeah.
the whisper.
So a couple things. Practically, I was in the process of making that decision to leave that job. And my dad had said growing up, never be responsible, you know, do your math, figure it out, be responsible. But I quit that job without a job. I went over and told a coworker, we'll call her Jay. I sat down at Jay's desk and said, hey, I just had this meeting. Here's the decision I've made. She's like, what? We both had pugs, dogs at the time. They were like litter mates. So we had something in common. We had spent time together outside of work. But I looked at her. She was a few years older at the time. She had the family, the mortgage, the house, the dogs, the goldfish, all the things. I didn't yet have that. And I was like, look at her. She's got a corporate job, a degree in zoology, working in finance, and she's kind of stuck. I'm none of those, but I'm frustrated and things feel like futility. So now what? So there's that. So I grew up in a faith environment, right? And that's gone through some iterations, but it's real to me. That weekend I was at home, I had pulled up a speaker that I thought was credible, I'll say it that way, and had some books out, and I was like looking for an answer. And whether it's God, the universe, whatever you want to say for conversation's sake, I believe that there's sovereign and synchronistic moments. And this was one of them for me. And I just sensed through some creative means, I had friends over, and there was the movie We Bought a Zoo with Matt Damon about this, it's a true story. Like somehow we ended up watching that, and like it wasn't planned. I don't know. There was a young kid in the group, and we turned it on. And I'm sitting at the end of the couch, Biggie, and by the end of the movie, I'm almost in tears, and no one knew. No, I'm not kidding. No
No,
one knew
no,
why.
dude, I feel you because I've watched it and I've also been in in I can relate, man. I relate.
Well, let me. So here's what happened, and I'm glad you can relate. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching that, and it's the scene where he's sitting on the porch, and Scarlett, which is my celeb crush, says, "I know your triggers." Triggers is a code word for OCD. Like I've had that mental bent all my life, and I never knew why until I quit corporate and went through this season where I had to literally trust divine dependence and see if all this was real. But it just struck me like a chord. And in that movie, he uses that two-word phrase, "Why not?" Like why not take the risk? Why not whatever? And so it was that next Sunday. Like I'm a drummer. I was playing in the worship band, and I was like in the audience at the moment, you know, whether you're a praying person or not, I know at some point we all turn to something, a higher power, and it's like, I thought to myself, it was just a thought, should I quit this job? And it was like a moment of levity and lightness. And in my conscience, in my spirit, in my heart, it was like those words came back. Why not? And I was like, really? But be responsible, you know. cross your T's, dot your I's. And it was like this playful nod from divinity or what have you. And I literally walked out of my job on that whisper. And it changed my trajectory ever since for the better. And that's what happened.
Awesome, man. I'm glad I asked. I'm glad I asked because it definitely I definitely think that and like you said, I could definitely think to some degree I think whether we like it or not, the universe or the world is talking to you. We just sometimes need to kind of stay quiet to be able to hear it. And sometimes we can't explain it, and we may not know where the journey is of where you want it to lead to, but it definitely does. And so no, I appreciate that, man. I think that's awesome. I love being, I'm glad we got to dig a little deeper there and get a little bit more there because I think that like, that's awesome. I think it's awesome to be able to kind of the fact also that you heard it because, and even if you go into the world of like, I tell people, and I've heard many guests say this before, like when you get like a thought or an inspiration or something that tells you to do something, you don't do it. And then later on, you then see someone else like that same idea that you had, but that you didn't do, someone else took it. It's kind of one of those where it's like, like sometimes that's what happens. It just like it whispers in your ear and tells you this is what you should be doing, and or this is what you should think of, and like you should do this, and then you either take it or you don't take it. And if you do take it, you don't know what the wonderful splendors of that could be. That's awesome, man.
Thank
I
you.
love that. Where can people follow you? Where can they learn more about you? Where can they especially if they want to, they're inspired and they want to spend more time with you and kind of go through the 3 P's with you and kind of have you coach them and stuff like that. Where can they get more information about you?
For sure. So on Instagram, it's currently Chef Kevin Culinary. A lot of my speaker content is currently on there. It's Kevin Green Elevates, LinkedIn, TikTok, and kevingreenelevates.com for my speaker website. Version 2.0 is coming out in the next couple of weeks, so it's going to be very specific to what I do, what I'm all about. And then I've got some courses and things of that nature in the works for next year, and so you can check me out there.
Out of curiosity, have you talked about or thought about just creating a separate Instagram for Kevin Green Elevates as like a separate, so that way it's like business and then the culinary chef stuff on the other side?
Yes, that's one of those overarching questions from a business standpoint. I think if you confuse, you lose. But we're kind of bridging the gap currently, and we're in the process of honing in and making some tweaks. So we'll see what happens there for sure.
Okay. I was just kind of curious because like I mean I have like a personal Instagram, I have a business Instagram, I got a podcast Instagram. So that's why I'm always kind of curious on like because it's so tough because like then you're like how do I share and at the same time be me and like and do all those things. So that's why I was curious since you had the TikTok and some of the other stuff already on it. Kevin, definitely a pleasure to chat with you. I really have enjoyed getting to hang out a little bit during my lunch break. So thank you so much for coming on and being on. If you're interested, definitely give him a follow. I think he's got definitely has some great things to kind of even on a day to day to be able to kind of remind you, but even more so someone to be able to kind of interact with and be able to kind of get inspired by. I think it's super important to be able to have people that kind of know and can kind of even help you, especially if you're questioning, what's my purpose or what am I supposed to do. Kevin's a great option to be able to kind of talk to and be able to kind of have him hopefully guide you through that or at least be able to lead you in the right direction, which I think is super important. That's our show for today. Thank you so much to Kevin Green Elevates for being on and for having lunch with me. Definitely make sure to check him out. Make sure to like and subscribe and share and rate and do all that good stuff with the podcast. If you want to support my brand, check out Deli Fresh Threads. Obviously, sandwich selfies. I want the sandwich selfies. Give it to me, especially if you're making a good sandwich. And if you're not, that's fine too. But thank you until next time. Keep eating sandwiches and follow your passion. Thanks, everyone.